cliches for the press when he talks about, performances and so on. But, you can tell when, the TV cameras cut to him during the game, you can tell he's not happy. Just by, I'm not a body language expert, but you can tell he's not happy with how they're performing against Aberdeen. But
then you look at how the other ones, I mean, the way he's going to be remembered, of those 7 defeats, you're talking Ross, you can St Mirren, in the semi-final, you're talking Hearts, you're talking Kilmarnock in the final, in the final, so, okay, the year previously, we lost.
It's not just Kilmarnock in the final, it's the Kilmarnock team managed by that Muppet Shields,
I know, but so I mean, for the life of me, mate, until that Kilmarnock game, I'd never, I can remember one, it was Aberdeen, and it was in 1990, right?
Was that epic penalty shootout?
Yeah, and we lost that, but there's never been a time, apart from that one, but just every game you go against a cup final, against a non-Old Firm cup finals, it used to be, you could have took it as read, we were going to get victory. But and under Lennon's stewardship, we now turn up to Hampden and almost certainly going to get beat. Look at it, from Ross County to Kilmarnock to Hearts to St Mirren, we'll get beat by teams where at the stages of the competition and in finals, I mean, the one that shook me to the core was that Kilmarnock one, because I was actually there and I thought, dear God, how did we lose this? How the fuck? Yeah. And it's the same performance that happens for Kilmarnock, that happens for Aberdeen, and for me, it seems, well, my conclusion is, we need a freshness, and I'm prepared to say, like yourself, thanks for the memories and well done, and move on.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately it's down to Lennon. If he wants to move on, he'll move on. If he wants to stay, the club aren't going to get rid of him. But I suppose if you're talking, about freshness, I think there's a freshness that needs to be not just on the pitch but off the pitch. And I just think there seems to be a separation now between the club and fans, and there's a lot of infighting that goes on, and it worries me at times as to how the club has gone about things. Look, when you've got such a disparate support base like Celtic, you're always going to have your divisions, you're always going to have your disagreements, but there just seems to be at this time and point a wedge being driven between the club and, there are factions involved in it all, and I've been critical of a lot of what the Green Brigade does, and I've also praised them and how they've gone about certain things, but the reality of what goes on is the club needs to embrace the next generation of fans coming through.
Exactly.
And they're not quite going about it. And, to a certain extent, I can understand that, there's a generation of guys coming through who are always going to want to do their own thing. And they have to be given a bit of latitude to go ahead and do it. Now, I'm not saying, give them enough rope to let them hang themselves, but you have to embrace that section of the club support as much as you embrace the people who sit there and just want to, shout at the left back and shout at the manager. But I just, I worry, and I think that if we need a bit of freshness, I'm not saying we need a clean broom to the entire club, but there seems to be a lot of dissatisfaction at the moment that needs to be tackled before, ultimately before it becomes a bigger problem. And I don't know how to solve it, but it's something that the club and everyone involved in it needs to tackle and needs to tackle head on. But
very interesting what you said there.
Well, you see, I think if there had been a little bit more, I don't want to use the word maturity, because people can slag off, people saying, they're just a bunch of teenage boys. They're not, but I just think if there'd been a bit more maturity on both sides, it just, dealing with the Green Brigade issue on both sides, then a lot of the rubbish that went on and against both the club and the Green Brigade could have been avoided. And, you know, I'm not one for airing dirty linen in public, but, you know, there should have been stuff done in the background. And maybe there was. I'm not privy to what went on. Maybe there was background negotiations going on that either broke down or there was promises broken on one side or the other. But, you know, I think there seems to be a great deal of support for, certainly in terms of the singing and the atmosphere and the displays and the banners and all that the Green Brigade bring, leaving aside other issues which can be debated at another point. But the club need to recognise that there's an element of the fan group, and, you know, of all ages coming through, that want that and that see that as important to the match day experience. And, you know, whether it's people who are bringing their kids along for the first time, and like I only really carry the Austria, I don't read the rest of the places. I'm not saying I'm a snob or anything, but, you know, there are a number of posts from people who say that, you know, I brought my kids along to the game and they just turned around and were watching the Green Brigade for the entire time. And the club need to recognise and embrace that. And, you know, they do to a certain extent, but they need to, and hopefully the safe standing will help to move that forward, but they need to recognise that there has to be a place in Celtic Park for that new approach to support, as well as what you would refer to as the current, or probably, I wouldn't say the majority, but certainly the more frequent attitude that appears to be amongst a certain element of the support that just goes along and, you know, stands up and claps a goal but doesn't really join in too much singing. And I don't know whether, you know, if we're talking about maybe it's time for Lennon to move on, whether or not Mr. Lawwell needs to take one of those jobs he's allegedly been offered down in the Premiership and bring in someone new. But it's a challenge for the club, and I'd like to think that the club are clever enough to recognise that there's an opportunity here at the moment to do a few things in the background while we don't have a strong challenger domestically. And, you know, I suppose if you could use the analogy of not winning cups, if we were blooding a lot of youngsters like, you know, Darnell Fisher, or, you know, some of the lads have gone out on loan, like, you know, and pardon, you know, the lad from Sweden, Baron Atunic, I'm probably butchering his name. But, you know, if we were losing cup games to the St. Mirrens and the Kilmarnocks, but had 3 or 4 youngsters in the team, it'd be it'd be a less bitter pill to swallow. And I just think that, you know, while we have this opportunity to do stuff on and off the pitch, I don't think it's enough just to, you know, stick 16 to 20 million pounds in the bank and say that's our little contingency fund for when a challenger emerges, whoever that might be, whether it's up from Aberdeen or whether it's from Edinburgh or whether it's from across the city. I think that you know, I was chatting away to a friend of mine about this, and he just wondered whether or not, if you remember, like when we won the double in the centenary year, we then didn't do enough to follow through on that and you know, back it up. And I just wonder whether or not we're falling into the same, making the same mistake of not building on that success and doing enough to take it forward.
Yeah. But there's a high level of disconnect at Celtic now that has to be looked at, and maybe hopefully Dermot Desmond is sitting somewhere looking at it, and maybe he's readjusting his pawns as we speak, but he's probably put more into his horse feed in recent times than he has of Celtic. But I really agree with a lot of what you said there, and, you know, the next generation of fans, I mean, it's not even the youngsters who go there. Anytime I've been there, it's me. I've sat there going, heck, I wish I was young enough and young enough to get there and do it myself, and remembering how it used to be, because of the generation you know, like the ones you're saying who like to sit there and moan and all that. That was one of the reasons why I didn't like going and sitting in the new Celtic Park, was because of the amount of people who just didn't want to support and what I would like, the way I would want to support, like the Green Brigade do at home, is singing and giving support. You know, if you're a supporter, that was the old style of the jungle. You know, and for a year when the Mankey mob went bust, I took my daughter to quite a lot of the away games, and it was brilliant fun to be had, and it probably still is a lot of the away games. You know, where everybody goes there for a sing-song, you back your team, you go to a different place, it's a wee atmosphere, it's a wee buzz, and you sing, you stand there and you sing. So it's not as if it's in a bygone era, it's still, if you go to an away game with Celtic, you're in a different atmosphere and a different lot of people you're around who are doing it a different way. But then what you've got now, there's a couple of major problems within the club. You know, the people are not feeling to understand what's happened with the Green Brigade and the element of Celtic, you know, and how anybody can turn round, and it's laughable to say, you know, there should be no politics at Celtic after how they were born out of, you know, the social injustice that happened, and for a Celtic fan to not have a conscience to be what's happening going on around you. And one of my favourite quotes is all the time, you know, well, people are starving and suffering whether they can heat or eat. Mr. Lawwell, our chief executive, takes £1 million, that's 20,000 a week, with a heated driveway, and everybody's entitled to a fair wage. But then when you find that people like him and a Lord Livingston, whose father was actually a GP in Parkhead Health Centre, that he can then and say, oh, we don't want to give these people money. So there's a huge disconnect there. And then the final bit, I'll just let you back in, bro, is how the collusion, and I think it's just so unforgivable that when people who have come out and stated what Mr. Lawwell's feeling was against the Green Brigade, and how they allowed the police to, well, carry out dawn raids and criminalise young Celtic fans, put them through hell for months on end. So when they turn round in the PR and their spin campaign, so we did this for the Amsterdam Justice, we're doing this and we're standing up for rights, yeah, that's because Celtic fans had to make a stand themselves and shame Celtic into making a case against the police to stop the Green Brigade being targeted arrests in the morning, dawn raids for what? For singing an Irish song. You know, Irish song, that's all it is. That's the only crime it is. And then this is the other fight, I'll let you back. This is if Celtic want to be serious, that the fans, instead of just being consumers of a football club that has, you know, just capitalist ethos about it, that if Celtic want to stand up against the criminalisation of our club and our culture, we've got to do it as a club together, and that's fans and PLC board manager, and all together, and face down this anti-Irish, anti-Catholic bigotry that still exists, clearly.
I don't pretend for one moment to have any great deal of insight into it. You know, I'm not entirely sure that there's an anti-Catholic or an anti-Irish motivation behind the police's approach to the Green Brigade. And to be honest, from what I understand and from what the guys are putting up on certain threads, this idea of dawn raids, it hasn't stopped. It still continues. Isn't there a lad in jail somewhere for 6 weeks?
Yeah. But it kind of calmed down to the extent that what the point was put against the club by elements of the Celtic support was, you know, that it was happening. It's kind of calmed down to the level of it was, you know.
To be honest, I mean, I know a few people have made reference to Chief of the Police House, isn't he? Is that his name?
Yeah, Stephen House.
He's a Catholic, as far as I know. Someone made reference to the fact that they saw him at a mass service greeting the Archbishop of Glasgow. But I just think that the motive for what goes on in relation to football fans in general is a lot. It's basically in a time of austerity, they've created a little cottage industry, which justifies them going to the people who run the budget and say, look, you can't cut overtime here because look at this problem here. We've got fans bringing flares into grounds and setting off bangers, which personally I wouldn't do it. I'm not going to say people should be locked up in jail. I wish they wouldn't do it, but I wouldn't want anyone to be locked up in jail for that kind of thing. I just think that's the motivation behind it all. Now, if it is,
No, well, see, can I just jump in
a lot more.
Can I just jump in briefly? I was walking along with my friend to the Milan game. We came over to Barcelona, and the police were just jumping out of motors, unmarked motors, and trying to arrest people. And I used to see it all the time when I was